thing about your time in Germany. I remember it from your book, but they forced you in school. You went to school.
I did, yes.
They
yes.
forced you, you said, to do the German salute.
Well, they tried to, but I didn't. I just.
Good for you.
Oh, sore arm.
Shoulder hurt.
Well, you see, I was only 14. I didn't know what I was doing.
That's that. At the time, we didn't have the internet. You know.
Oh no!
We didn't
Gosh,
have TV.
nothing like that.
We didn't have TV. So, if you could just tell us a little bit about Bletchley and how
I came to be here.
How you came to be here,
yes.
And we've talked about this before, I know, but I've told you in the United States, very few people know about Bletchley Park and what happened here and the importance of Bletchley Park, which is why I wanted all of us to come here.
Yes, right.
Because it played such a significant role in so many things
True,
during
yes.
the war.
Well, that's wonderful. And then all of you can talk about it.
That's right.
It should spread well.
We will spread it. We will spread
Good
it.
for you. Yes, well, no, I had no idea. I'd never heard of Bletchley. And after you've done your basic military training, as you probably know, you're asked what you would like to do, be a driver or a gunner or whatever. Although, no, I don't think girls went on to the gun sites in those days. But anyway, there was a fair choice, cooks, orderlies, all that sort of thing. But I said I really didn't know, but they looked at my CV and found that I was bilingual, so sent me off on a special to a special interview in London. And at the end of it, he said, "Here's a railway warrant, get yourself to Bletchley." Bletchley? Never heard of it. Anyway, I soon discovered, because the first thing I had to do was read and sign the Official Secrets Act, which some of you may understand is a pretty formidable document. But you realize you're cut off from the rest of the world for until 1975. And that is a hell of a long time to keep quiet.
And that's when it was declassified. 1975 is when they declassified.
Yes. It was a rather frightening thing for somebody as inexperienced as I was, but there's only one thing to do, and that's say to yourself, well, that's it. You've signed it, so you don't talk to anybody, not even outside your own office.
Your own family. Couldn't talk to your family.
No, they never knew. Because both my parents died before 1975.
What did they think you were doing?
Pardon?
What did they think you were doing?
Well, I just said I was doing a boring secretarial job. But I think because my father had been in the army in the First World War, and I was wearing the intelligence corps badge, which we all did, I think he put 2 and 2 together and made 6. I don't know. He never asked me. But I think it's obvious for a former military man that he must have had some idea. But
how did your parents feel when you, as their daughter, joined the ATS? Did they were okay with it? Did they try to talk you out of it?
No, they didn't. No, I remember my mother saying that. Because she'd recently had one of the first mastectomy operations in Birmingham, she said, if you ever feel you want to come home, just tell them about my medical story and we'll probably get you out, something like that, you know. But they never complained. And I was able to go home from time to time. I went home for my 21st birthday, which took me all day to get there, but I did go.
Was there a lot of women in the ATS? Was there a lot of women?
Yes, I've forgotten the numbers, but yes. I volunteered, but the following week, conscription came in, and hundreds and hundreds of women were called up.
That's equivalent to our WEC.
Yes, that's right. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Come on, folks. Any more questions?
Let me ask you a question, if you don't mind me. Yesterday we were at the Churchill Museum, and one of the things that they said was that Churchill came up with some intelligence that Russia was going to be attacked by Germany. And apparently the Russians didn't believe it, but nonetheless, that information was passed on. Were you aware of that information, or what are some of the other types of important information
Well,
you were aware of?
simply no. Because you see, I was very, very young, very junior, and my first job here was to register the messages which our signal men and women had taken down both in this country and abroad. And then they were fed in here at terrific rate, something like 10,000 a day sometimes. And there was nothing in the clear. All you could see was the date. The rest of it was in groups of 5 letters or 5 figures. That's all we had at my level. That's all we had to work on. So quite simply, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
And
No, you answered it. That was a good answer.
each level, each level, is the way I understand it at least. Each hut, each area, each section of Bletchley Park had a very specific job.
Yes,
And they would do their job and their job only. And that may be
that's right.
to decode one thing, one small little thing, and then they would pass that on to their supervisor, and they would maybe consolidate a couple things, and then they would pass that on to their supervisor, and they would consolidate.
Well, that's right. I mean, the whole process was the taking down the messages by the signal people, passing it here for registration, translation, decoding, then translation, and then obviously sorting out what was important and what wasn't, and then deciding whether the messages would go straight to Churchill or straight to the commanders in the field. I mean, that's a very, very broad thing, but that is basically all the processing that had to be done.
And your second job here was to tweak those messages, wasn't it?
Yes.
To adjust the messages.
Yeah. That was in the Japanese section, so quite late on. And that's why I was sent to America, to the Pentagon.
Talk about how that happened. Talk about exactly what you did there and how you did that.
Well, I simply paraphrased, translated, and translated messages. I didn't ever handle Japanese. It was far beyond me to do that. But yes, well, that's simply it. No, I would be given messages which had been translated and changed the wording so that it meant exactly the same thing, but we hoped would not be recognizable as having been picked up and translated.
And when you were living here, where did you live?
Oh, to begin with, most people lived in other people's houses in the villages round about. We were bussed in on a 3-shift system until, I forgot the exact date, but later on in the war they built a camp within walking distance for the Army and the Air Force. The Wrens were housed at Woburn Abbey. I'm trying to remember the name of the family and I couldn't think. Anyway, it's a very high up aristocratic family who were turned out completely, and the Wrens went in there, and they were bussed in for every shift. But for people like me who lived locally, we had a very good social life. Because there were, on camp there was two professional musicians. One was Herbert Murrell, who was a Bach expert, and he ran a Bach choir. And we had a young violinist who also was professional and ran an orchestra. We had a gramophone club, madrigal society, all sorts of things like that. And freedom, if you had a bicycle, you could cycle around the countryside. And that's the only time we were allowed to wear plain clothes.
How long did you live here?
Sorry?
How long did you live here?
From 41 till 45 when I went to America. Washington, D.C. Yes, in the Pentagon. With 32,000 other people.
Yeah. Can you describe your day on June 6th of 44?
I'm sorry, could I?
On D-Day.
D-Day.
What was your day like?
Well, obviously a great deal of rejoicing. we still had to get on with our work. I did, because I was in the Japanese section then, because we had to continue with our work. But I mean, basically it was normal human rejoicing, and thousands of people went up to London. I did on one of the days, and the crowds were absolutely massive, dense. You didn't need to consciously walk. You were just taken along by the masses of people.
Did, there's a funny story that you tell about I believe a boyfriend that you had. And so when you would give...
You know too much.
Well, that's when you publish a book. Betty, when you publish a book, you know.
Sorry.
We don't like to talk about stuff like that, do we?
We have a lot of decoders in the group, you know. A lot of us are decoders. We have all the intelligence. So they had a standard address they would give their family to write letters or send letters or what have you. Obviously,
Yes, I think it was box 222 or something like that.
box 222
It was in London anyway.
in London. So as far as everybody that knew you, they thought you were working in London.
Yes, they did. Yes,
on the
yeah.
intelligence side.
Yeah.
So tell us about your boyfriend at that time.
Well, my Canadian boyfriend.
The story of when he
Canadian.
tried to surprise you. He tried to surprise you, and he knew your address was London. You know,
Oh, that's right. Yes, I'm sorry, I'd forgotten
no,
that.
that's a good story.
Yes, this was someone who was introduced through some friends of my father's in San Francisco. Yes, well, I don't know exactly where we met, but he had been given this post office box number in London, not realizing it was just a post box. He thought he'd find me there.
So he came to surprise Betty and he showed up at the post office.
Yes, that was ridiculous, but anyway, we got over that somehow. He was at Biggin Hill. He was an intelligence officer in the Air Force.
And you mentioned it was 3 8-hour shifts
Yes.
that you worked. So 8 hours on and then 16 hours off. And you did it every day? Was it every day? Or did
Well, it was 8 till 12. No, wait a minute. 8 till 4, 4 to midnight, and midnight to 8.
Okay.
I didn't always do it. It depended on the workload, I think. But I didn't like the night shift. Nothing worse than trying to stay awake during the night. Does anybody have to do that?
I think we've all had to at one time or another.
Yeah, no, it doesn't help one's constitution at all.
When you signed up for this, did you willingly sign up? I mean, did you want to do this?
Oh,
or was it
yes,
something
I
that
wasn't
you felt
conscripted.
An obligation to do.
No, I just wanted to join up with other friends. So I was actually at a domestic science college near Shrewsbury. And because of the food shortages, I mean, the course wasn't very good. We didn't do what we normally would have done. And 4 of us decided we would leave midterm, which didn't please our parents very much. And I went into the ATS, and 2 went into the RENs, and another one into the WAFs. I don't know what happened to the rest of the course.
Were there many, since you're all sort of here in one location for several years, were there many relationships, boyfriends, girlfriends?
Well, there weren't many men, you see.
Right, they were all.
Because most of the men who were fit were in the field.
Right.
The men who were here were usually elderly people from the universities. They were the basic people here. There were one or two younger men, but then you discover that they had a medical condition which didn't allow them to be in the field.
Those are pretty lucky men.
Yeah.
That was a good ratio.
Yes, absolutely.
That was a good duty station.
Actually, it was a bit rough. We didn't have
Even the one-legged guy got to
Yeah, but we had a good social life. I mean, there were often dances and things. And then, of course, when I've forgotten how many of your countrymen came over here, I think, was it about 300? I'm sorry, I've forgotten the number. But
To Bletchley?
to Bletchley
You don't
itself,
remember.
no. And they brought with them lots of goodies, which of course we hadn't seen for years. It's wonderful.
The bombing of London, was there any bombing out here?
Yes, there was. I don't think it was intentional, but one was dropped between, there's a church not far away, between the church and here. I mean, it makes sense to think that they were trying to bomb the station, train station, which is 5 minutes walk from here. But nobody was hurt. And there's no way of knowing whether the one that fell near the church was intentional or not. But I would think it probably wasn't because of the proximity of the railway line.
And how far do you live from here today?
How far are we?
50 miles.
Oh, okay.
It's not far, and it's a
quarter.
good motorway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mainly motorway.
So you mentioned, Betty, your trip to the United States, flying to the
Yeah.
U.S. How interesting that was at the time.
Well, yes.
If you could just talk about your time in the U.S., your initial reactions when you first arrived in the U.S. What did you think? What were your initial reactions?
It's rather big.
And how old were you when you arrived in the
I'm
U.S.?
sorry?
How old were you when you went to the United States?
Oh gosh, 41, 22, wasn't I? Yes. Yes, it was a very, very interesting exercise for me. I loved it. I was billeted in a place called the Cairo Hotel in Washington, 16th and Q, I think it was. So it was way out of the city. No, I enjoyed Washington very much. There was quite a big British contingent out there. And we had a good social life as well. Very good.
Did the Americans treat you
Yes,
properly?
very, very properly, very pleasantly. One of the, what was the American wax? Was it?
Yeah, the wax.
Wax.
Women's Auxiliary Corps.
That's right, yes. Well, there were a lot of them in the Pentagon. And we had to be checked in every day. And sometimes I said to the girl, you know perfectly well who I am. Yeah, Betty, well, we got to do it. So.
That was the security when you were going to the Pentagon.
Yes.
Did you wear a uniform when you were in the
Yes,
States?
yes, we did. But it was the Canadian summer uniform because our khaki was too hot for Washington. And Washington, as you probably know, very hot and sticky. So the Canadian, well, I think that photograph was taken with me wearing the Canadian summer
It's in
uniform.
here. It's in the book.
Yes.
That one? Is that one?
That's it, and that was my boss. He's English.
And you arrived during the summertime, didn't you?
Yes, it was June.
So it was hot.
It was very
Oh,
hot.
it's so hot. in the summer there.
It was
I weren't ready for that.
because you were coming from this weather
Yes.
that we're having today to.
Yes, bit of a contrast.
Brian, were you asking her about D-Day or D-Day?
D-Day.
Yes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I didn't want to correct her, but
Yeah.
what I was really getting at was on the day of the invasion, when the troops went from England over to France,
Normandy.
I'm sure that was a very busy intelligence gathering day with a lot of intense pressure and stuff, and that's what I kind of wanted to get from you is to describe that day.
Well, at my
Did you
level,
even know that was happening? Did you know on D-Day that was even happening?
no, we didn't. Not at my level, at any rate. I mean, bear in mind, I was
When did you
very
find
junior.
out that the Normandy invasion happened?
Well, you're going to laugh at this, but I got mumps, and I was in hospital in Northampton when all this was going on. Oh, it's called Sod's Law, isn't it? Yes.
You probably found out from some nurse.
No, it was maddening because the thing was that well, it was just one of those things. There was a lot of it going on around here, and I was one of them. And they pushed me off in an ambulance and left me in Northampton. And I didn't know what was going on. Sorry, it's a very negative answer.
We need to draft a new answer for you.
Yes, I wish you would.
You could cut the intensity with a knife.
Yes.
But that's a common theme that we'll see when we go over to Normandy as well. It's probably like if you could have somebody in the military today that was a PFC, then and then now. Really, one of the main differences in the military is the level of knowledge that the lower level soldiers have today versus then. So in World War II, part of the struggle, as I've sat down with Mr. Clanton over the last couple of years, we've tried to piece together his journey, where he was at what time exactly, and try to narrow that down. Part of the struggle is he didn't know. The soldiers at his level were never told where they were at. In many cases, they weren't told what country they were in. They were just simply, many times they weren't even briefed on the mission. They were just dropped and go take that hill or go execute this or follow orders. And in World War II, it was usually the company commander level that was in on what the whole plan was. Even the lieutenants, in many cases, didn't fully understand the plan. Where they were at. Certainly they didn't have maps, they didn't have compasses, they didn't have things like that. In today's military, every single soldier down to the lowest level has a GPS. They know exactly where they're at all the time. They can see where they're going, they can see all those things. And that wasn't the case. But today on the administrative side, on the intelligence side, it's not much different than it was what you're describing. They have these intelligence analysts and they sit in a room, in a cubicle, and they were responsible for one little thing. If it's transmitting a signal or collecting a drone shot of this or whatever, and they just take that and pass it on. They don't know anything that's happening. They're not part of the mission planning. The information that they generate is a big part of the mission plan, but it's for the generals and for the higher up guys. Same today. It's no different today.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going on.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you couldn't talk to everybody singly about what was going on.
It's quite interesting to see how it's all pieced together. But what you just mentioned, we all have this grand romantic vision of World War II at this point in time, because we look at it as Britain and the United States together saved the world, and the guys that were on the ground valiantly assaulted this objective or that objective, and the folks who, like Betty, who did all the work to gather the intelligence, were masterminding this complex. It wasn't like that. It was get on the ground and go now.
Kill or be killed.
Kill or be killed. I don't know where I don't know where I am, but I got to take that building or I'm going to die. And from your standpoint, it was I have my job to do and I have to do it now and I have to do it well.
Yes.
And that's a fundamental situation, and it's part of the reason it's so hard to recreate history in this point in time, because the only guys that are still with us are the younger troops. So you don't have the strategic, the generals. You don't have that perspective at this point in time. But to me, the most valuable of all the information is from those who are actually doing the work, which was Betty and Mr. Clanton, because you all were on the front lines. Another difference between today and World War II is that the officers were 50 miles back, and then the guys are on the front lines doing all the hard work. So to me, those relate very closely, with your story, just in different ways. But I just think it's so fascinating that you, Betty, had a little piece of information that you collected or passed on that ultimately formed into this piece of intelligence that worked its way all the way up through probably the Prime Minister's office, and then eventually it made its way over to the Eisenhower and his group, Supreme Allied Command, and then that made its way down to all of the different division commanders, and then division commanders to what they called regimental commanders at the time, and then battalion commanders, and then some of that made its way down to company commanders, and some of that made its way down to platoon leaders, and then that platoon leader, Mr. Clanton, was a forward observer. He was on a forward observer artillery team, so his job was to sight the German target positions Cannon Company is a company that each division has this sort of medium range artillery, because traditional artillery is for 5+ miles out, long range artillery, and then you have your closer mortars and things that the guys on the ground use for close fire support. But Cannon Company was designed to have a more mobile artillery unit that could move quickly to do closer range support, say a mile or two out. So Mr. Clanton's job as a forward observer was to move ahead of the lines with the infantry, usually on the front lines, find the German positions, and then call them back to his guns, to the guys that had the guns, to shoot and destroy those targets. So he was right up there, in many cases, ahead of the infantry, under extremely heavy fire, trying to call in the positions. So probably information that you gained at some point here at Bletchley Park as a group, that information in terms of German locations, artillery, or positions, things like that, probably some of that information
it would have been, yes.
Eventually cycled its way down to
absolutely, yes.
Mr. Clanton.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing is you're still here.
Yeah.
Can I ask, did you ever, obviously you're processing just hundreds of pieces of data on a regular basis. Did you ever know, when, this is an important piece, or was it all just sort of vague? Or
No.
There's times you knew, this is important.
No, at my level, I didn't know, no.
That's what I figured.
Sounds a silly thing to say, but it's true, because you just couldn't discuss with anybody else from another office.
Right.
Yeah, because you couldn't even talk to the person next to you about anything. Even somebody you lived with that worked at Bletchley Park, you couldn't talk about it, right? You couldn't talk about anything.
Well, within your own office you could, but not outside it, no.
So did you all ever try and put things together on your own? Maybe other people, hey, what do you know? What do you know? Let's figure it out.
No, I don't remember that at all. And we were very fortunate in that everyone was true to their promise not to say anything, except on one occasion I've understood lately that there were a couple of girls who were talking in a way that they shouldn't have done in public. Well, they were in the canteen, as I understand it, and we didn't see them again.
Wow. Did you ever meet Churchill?
No, I didn't. He came here just before I arrived, and so no, I never saw him. No, sadly. And then, I was just thinking, this is a bit out of line, but I have a copy of General Eisenhower's thank you letter, which he wrote to Bletchley. And when I give talks, I always read it out at the end of my session. Yes. It's a very long one.
That's amazing. Did he ever visit here, General Eisenhower, at any point after the war or any time?
I don't think so, but he came to the Pentagon in a tank.
Oh, I remember that.
Yes.
In the center.
In the center.
Center of
yeah.
the Pentagon.
Actually, yes, how many acres is that? I can't remember. It's pretty big.
Oh,
It's 6 or 7 acres, I think.
yeah, it's huge. I don't
It is
know.
huge. Yes. Mm.
And the Pentagon was built, I believe it was built for World War II, during World War II.
Yes, it was.
And so
Yeah.
you were one of the first
Yes,
folks to work there.
that's right. Yes. 32,000 others.
30, right.
Can't believe it, can you? We wonder how the cooks got on for lunch.
When you look back at your service and what your country's been through and what both of our countries have been through, what does it mean to you at this point, at this stage, to look back and you see like the D-Day anniversary is approaching, the 78th anniversary of D-Day. We're going to celebrate soon the 78th anniversary of VE Day, victory in Europe. What does that mean to you at this point?
Well, I suppose, in a word, I'm very glad that I was involved in it. May sound a funny thing to say, but it's something to be proud of, I think. Do you agree?
Very much so.
It's, Derek is ex-army as well.
Yeah, 25 years.
Were you? Thank you.
Yeah, in the British Army. On the engineering side, we were there fixing things. So didn't do any shooting.
I was a combat engineer.
Yes.
Combat engineer.
I've read a little bit about you before. Betty's share.
Oh,
That intelligence.
I'm more another intelligence gatherer.
Yeah, well, you were in Afghanistan, isn't you?
Iraq.
Iraq, yes.
Equally as horrible, yeah. I didn't actually do any combat. I was in Northern Ireland for 2 years, which was a little bit dangerous.
That was very
A little bit.
Yeah.
God.
Other than that, I was in peacetime. 12 years in Germany. Obviously, the Soviet Union was the big threat
Sure.
to us at that stage. And we're training the River Weser. I don't know if you've heard any things about German, but River Weser was a very important landmark. Stopped the Russian crossing. A lot of training around that area. I enjoyed every moment of it.
I'm just glad that Betty received the memo that we only allow Army guys on this tour. Because if she would have showed up with a Navy guy,
I had problems at the time before we read it.
I mean, it just so happened there's a bunch of the folks here, like Tracy sitting next to you, and Mike floating around, Mike back there. Served, and we were all in the Army. We all had.
We were from the Navy because they saved our butts.
They did save our butts.
Were you
They
Army?
did save our butts. As did here.
Just an observer.
Well, that's important too.
Well, thank you for your service. I reached out to Betty a couple years ago, I think.
It must be because we've had 2 years of COVID.
Yeah, I think it was a couple years ago, and we did a little interview on the phone, on the telephone, and we sort of became friends over email. Emailed back and forth a lot, and then when we planned this trip, well, from the get-go, I told Betty, I said, next time I come over, we have to meet at some point. And so we just thought it would be a perfect opportunity for all of us to get together and get to see where you worked, where you served your country. And then again, it's very important, I think, for people to understand what happened here, what took place here.
It is, yes.
And to try to understand it, and then for Mr. Clanton to be able to see it and understand what was happening on, complete other side of the spectrum, I think is really important.
Now, what are you doing about going around the whole place today? Are you?
Here, so
You've got a guide?
We have a tour today at 1:30. At 1:30, which is going to be a guided tour of the outside, which lasts for about an hour.
Oh, good.
So up until then, which is about an hour and a half from now, we're just going to walk around a little bit, do the self-guided tours. The tour at 1:30 will not go inside any of the buildings. It'll just be like a tour of the grounds.
And you know that there's a cafe if you're facing up this way, slightly to the left, the side of the mansion, there is a canteen there. And
Next to the mansion.
Next to the mansion, yes, on the left. Yes.
Sounds like a good lunch place.
There's a lake. You'll see.
Yes, a lovely lake. Unfortunately, the swans have gone. We think the fox got them. There used to be always 2 swans on the lake. Sad.
Do you come here often?
Well, not with any regularity, but I was here on Fridays, it happens. And we have a gathering we did have before COVID, every year for ex-members. And not only from here, but from we had a lot of outstations, girls who did the signalling, and they usually come to that. But of course, we're diminishing. It has something to do with old age.
How many veterans from Bletchley are still?
Well, we don't know for certain because there were no records kept, and unless they come forward, we don't know. But I think at the last reunion before COVID, probably about 60. But that doesn't mean to say there aren't some still there, but they don't come forward.
Did you already mention what building you worked in?
Yes, I was in the mansion to begin with, which was very cozy compared with the huts, which were either terribly cold or terribly hot, and very primitive and very uncomfortable. So I was one of the fortunate ones. There was a major tester who was very prolific in languages, particularly German. He had offices there, and I was lucky enough to be in one of them until I went over to what was called Block F, which has been taken down, but that was where the Japanese side of it was carried on.
Block F, is it Frank?
Sorry?
Block F, you said? Frank? Block F, okay.
I missed that.
Oh, I didn't hear you. I was just Block F. I was just
Oh,
asking.
Block, yes, it was called Block F.
Okay.
It housed everybody who was dealing with the Japanese side of things.
And I was telling the group before you came in, but all sorts of intelligence was gathered here, not just German.
Oh,
We had
yes.
Japanese, Italian,
Yeah, that's right.
Russian, all sorts of different
Yes.
signals were intercepted.
Mm. Oh, yes. And some of it, of course, could be rubbish at times.
Betty, tell if you could then just talk a little bit about how Bletchley was restored as a park for people to see. Talk about some of the things you've done over the years to help Bletchley Park fundraise and to make it what it is today, because it wasn't always like this.
Oh, no, because after the war, we had to take everything away in the way of papers and so on. And then the post office had it for a while and rather knocked things about, I understand. It was many years before I came back here, but we did have reunions outside Bletchley, mainly in Bedford, weekend reunions. And that was where we were all encouraged to talk amongst ourselves and get the whole picture. Because before that, I had no idea about what was going on, and nobody did. But these weekend gatherings encouraged us to talk about what we'd all done, and that was how we put the picture together.
And so, when did they start the renovation process to open this up as a public?
Oh, sorry, I don't know exactly, but I think the post office was here for quite a few years. Sorry, I can't remember exactly when.
Okay.
But of course, there were a lot of gaps during COVID. But a great deal has been done since, and there's a new exhibition which was opened last week by Dan Snow, or you may not know him, but anyway, it doesn't matter. That's Block A, which is, I hope you'll be taken in there, because that is, in my view, very, very good.
What other places should we definitely have to visit while we're here today? Are there other favorite places?
Yes, you may like to see the memorial to the 3 Polish people who were very prominent in helping us. That's to the right of the mansion, tucked away a bit, but somebody will take you, I expect. And then 11A, that's another interesting one. Then there's the D-Day landing one, which is on all the time. That's well marked, you'll find that easily. Yeah.
Make sure you take a look at that.
I understand your role, it was kind of granulated. You get bits and pieces, and somebody else up the chain would put them all together eventually. But, and this is a really stupid question, but where did the information come from? How was it gathered, and how did it get here?
Oh, from our signal men and women who were stationed in England and all around the world, actually. That was the source.
But did it come in electronically, like over a telephone line?
Either by oh dear, what's the word?
Telegraph?
Yes, telegraph, and by dispatch riders, some of it.
By what?
Dispatch riders,
Oh, dispatch.
yes.
So when that information came in, I guess somebody was sending it to all these different huts and all in the different places, so it all came into one place.
Yes, again, I wasn't privy to that information, but clearly that is how they would have done it. Yes.
So the range, just to add on to Brian's question, the range of any sort of communication back in World War II was very short. So we had these little signal stations attached to each unit that were out in the field. We did on the U.S. side, and I assume the British did on their side. And so these signal folks would intercept anything they could, whether it was coded or not coded or what have you, and then they would feed it all up the chain, and then some of it would come here and it would go around. But from the communication total picture of the war, you had your tactical communication and you had your strategic communication. So the tactical communication at the time was unsecure. So like today we use scrambled, secure nets that are, they jump every millisecond, and it's a coded sequence that you upload every day to your radio, and it's called a fill, and you stick a deal in your radio and you fill it, upload it, and it changes every day. So it's always new, coded, completely unbreakable signal. But back in the day on the tactical side, there was either complete radio silence, meaning during an attack or an offensive operation, it was usually complete radio silence until the attack started. And then they would start using the radios, because every single radio on the tactical side was completely traceable, no different than a police scanner today, same type of thing. So whenever there was an offensive operation, usually the tactical units keep radio silence until they started, and then they would start intercepting. Bletchley's role is they intercepted the strategic side of the communications, which was the Enigma, which was the planning side of it. And that's what happened here. So none of the tactical stuff really made its way here. That was all sort of handled at the lower level units, but all the strategic stuff made its way here, regardless of how it was intercepted.
Big story, isn't it?
Right? Huge. It was unbelievable. I mean, that's in some ways that we were talking earlier, Julia and I were talking, but in some ways, the technological advances during World War II were greater than any other time in our history, including today, because we had to. We had no choice.
Exactly.
If we didn't, we would have lost. We would be living very different lives today.